We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and seek the truth with FBI whistleblower and common sense extremist Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast. Today is Wednesday, February 25th, 2026. And today we're going to be talking about trans-terrorism, but not the way you think. So it's the latest and greatest FBI bust of a 764 nihilistic violent extremist. We'll dig into that. We'll also do a talk about prison influencers who are starting to emerge, and a callback to an old FBI case there, and also a history lesson on the firing of FBI director. And let's compare him to the current guy. Let's get after it, guys. Trans-terrorism. That's something that I think a lot of people are talking about right now because there's a lot of concern about mentally deranged folks who are claiming to be trans. And you had the Covenant Christian shooting that happened a few years back in Tennessee, where there was a girl who jacked herself up with a whole bunch of male hormones and went and murdered 6 people, 3 small children, 3 teachers in that school there. And look, trans-terrorism, though, today hasn't really caught on, I guess, over at the FBI as the latest and greatest banded threat that they could possibly come out and devolve their national security mission into. I haven't heard anything about that. But what are we doing, actually, when we're transing the national security mission? We're devolving it away to the latest and greatest threat. We've covered down on the nihilistic violent extremists and how that's really not it. The 764 threat, for what I can tell, it's a bunch of internet trolls who are, a lot of them are juveniles, and the FBI's waited for them to turn to be 18 years old so that they can spring the mousetrap on them. And look, not defending these guys, a lot of them are pedophiles. A lot of them are encouraging other vulnerable people to engage in activities that are really, truly awful. I mean, self-harm. They're convincing kids to mutilate themselves or to engage in other really awful activities. So, not wanting to defend these guys. My concern, though, is that the FBI is, after all, nothing if not a self-licking ice cream cone. It's a bureaucracy. The middle letter of B in FBI is bureau, short for bureaucracy. They constantly are engaging in that mission creep. They're trying to jam that square peg into the round hole because they want that sweet, sweet government cash, guys. Look, and I think the American people are going to have the wool pulled in front of their eyes on this one. Nobody is going to care if they lock up a pedophile and call him a terrorist. I don't care what you call him. He deserves to go face first into a wood chipper, maybe feet first into a wood chipper so we can hear him scream. But this is the cautionary tale. This is the slippery slope. So I am concerned that nihilistic violent extremists being the latest and greatest threat out there, right? Threat. We don't really know what they mean by that. They are supposed to be law enforcement. They're supposed to be figuring out when guys do the wrong thing. They put together the evidence and they bring forward a lawful, judicious investigation, and they can present the facts, and then the American people would have their say, right? You present the facts in front of a prosecutor, and then we have a trial to determine if somebody is guilty or innocent. It's not up to the government to be the arbiter of what is right and what is wrong. And when you deal with threats, that's a problem. It's also a problem when you deal with extremists. How do you define what it is to be extreme? I'm a pretty extreme guy, right? I'm out there pounding the pavement, running long distances. That's extreme. Just ask about everybody out there. What's the matter with you, Steve? So try to set this all out there, because I am very concerned, because whenever you create the opportunity for government to get its foot in the door, it will. The camel gets his nose under the tent, and pretty sure soon its entire body is out there. So let's look at the latest and greatest threat out there, the latest and greatest example of a big FBI takedown, and let's determine Not if it was appropriate to arrest a bad guy for engaging in criminal activity, but whether or not this is terrorism, because the slippery slope is there. Latest and greatest example I have is out of the FBI Los Angeles field office, where they were very excited to announce the ADIC, yes, he's called an ADIC, Assistant Director in Charge, Akil Davis, made a big announcement, delivered remarks at a press conference that they had arrested Matthew Edward Pisher, right? It's kind of Pysher. Let's go with Pisher. He's 18 years old. He's believed to have targeted a young girl as part of a nihilistic, violent extremist ideology on the internet. We also have an adjoining press release that came from the United States Attorney's Office for the Central District of California. Headline: Pennsylvania man arrested at Castaic Motel, federally charged after grooming minor victim into engaging in acts of self-harm. They go on to say that Mr. Pisher groomed, encouraged the victim to send him material of herself engaging in sexually explicit acts. So he groomed her to send him child pornography, which is called CSAM, child sexual abuse material. He also encouraged her to cut herself. And then, based on review of the context of the victim's smartphone, Pisher's online activities, law enforcement believes that he is associated with NVE ideology, and the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force is all over this. So we're back to nihilistic, violent extremism, and we'll get to the 764 angle to it. So we're trying to jam that square peg into the round hole because we want to make grooming kids into terrorism, because that will, I guess, open up the coffers. It'll at least be an opportunity for the FBI to boost its stats. So Kash Patel can go out there and say that we have upped the amount of NVE arrests by 490%, which means they went from 10 to 59. And how did they do it? By getting a bunch of pedophiles under arrest for pedophilia, for hurting kids. Again, no problem with that. My problem is in calling it terrorism, because that creates the opportunity for that slippery slope. And I went to the actual criminal complaint to find out just what it was that this guy did. And let's see if the American Radicals podcast on YouTube at AmRadPod, on rumble.com/AmRadPod, or if you don't catch us live, you always can catch us over at Spotify. Let's see if we work our way through the criminal complaint, if you agree, not that this was the appropriate thing to do, to arrest a bad guy, but if it was in fact terrorism. So let's go to the criminal complaint, which I have, guys. I have my connections. I have got my contacts. I read through it. It's a 43-page document, which I believe would be like quadruple what they did to get the J6 pipe bomber. So it's got to be a pretty buttoned up, long form investigation, right? Well, no, it's a criminal complaint. So they went out and got him quickly. The affiant of this case, her name is Haley Krzyzewski. She's been on the Joint Terrorism Task Force for 2 years. Her expertise is not in crimes against children. Now, she gives a background if we scroll our way through, which we can kind of do here. These paragraphs are numbered. It's for your own reference. Again, it's a 43-page document. She gets to the background of what it is to be a nihilistic, violent extremist and a member of the 764. She says that nihilistic, violent extremists are individuals who engage in criminal conduct. Okay, so let's spell out what it is to be a terrorist. Terrorism is criminal conduct that hurts people, that's violent in nature, and its goal is to bring about some sort of political unrest, some sort of change because of terror. You fill the people with terror so they do what you want them to do. And it's motivated about a religious belief or some sort of political belief. Like, that's what terrorism is. And that's sort of what they spell out, but with their own little bit of a spin, because it's the latest iteration of extremism, of terrorism, domestic terrorism. Nihilistic violent extremism are individuals engaging in criminal conduct. They want to further a political, social, or religious goal. They don't really give you a specific one. And they want to bring about the collapse of society. That's a pretty big goal there, if you ask me. Here's one, though, that I want to highlight. And before I do, let's see if we can think of any parallel that can go to it. The quote, NVEs systematically target vulnerable individuals by grooming, extorting, coercing, or otherwise compelling through force or threat of force the victims to mutilate themselves or do violence or threaten violence to others and either film or photograph such activity. Let me restate that, but be a little bit more narrow in that. Again, they systematically target vulnerable people. Let me think of an organization that systematically targets vulnerable people. You know, people who are down on their luck, maybe just not the smartest one in the bunch, emotionally disturbed. They target those vulnerable people and they coerce them to do violence, do their worst ideas. Oh, and also, do you think you could video yourself doing it? That'd be great. I think the FBI might be a nihilistic violent extremist organization. It just, when I read that, that was the first thing that came to mind. But let's get to the specifics on what winds up happening with this case. So apparently, mom finds that her daughter, who is 12 and slash 13, I guess she must have had a birthday somewhere in the interactions that she has with our dirtbag, Mr. Peischer, in there. She finds out that her daughter is communicating with this bad guy on Discord, where he kind of tracked her down on a mental health chat group. And then he went to work on her and he groomed her and he got her to send him child sexual abuse material, basically video yourself doing some really naughty things to yourself and also harm yourself, cut yourself. So the FBI got all over it. Agent Krzyzewski, I mean, this is a threat to public safety. We're going to take action in 10 days. 10 days go by from mom bringing this to the FBI's attention. And the FBI, the agent has her cup of coffee in the morning. She's banged out a couple of emails, maybe chit chatted, and she says, okay, I'm going to go get these devices from mom. So she does, gets the devices from the mom. And then the little girl freaks out because she's embarrassed. She maybe thinks that she's in love with this guy, whatever the motivations are. The little girl leaves a suicide note and runs away. Well done, FBI. Well done. Likes to go with that light touch. Well, I mean, in the agent's defense, maybe the mom had a candid chat with the girl and the girl freaked out. Girl runs away and then winds up meeting up with this dirtbag, Peischer, who has flown from Pennsylvania to California and met with the girl. So FBI uses their resources. They send some emergency authorizations out there. Basically, think of it like as a search warrant, but they don't need to actually go through all those efforts. They get some email addresses and some phones, and they're able to ping, and they find this guy, and he's in a hotel with this little girl. When I say they, I'm not referring to this particular FBI agent, though, because she writes down in here in this criminal complaint, she didn't want to get her hands dirty. She's a member of the Joint Terrorism Task Force, weapons of mass destruction, but they can do most of their work from a cubicle. So, not tip of the spear with this particular agent. She winds up writing how law enforcement tracks down little girl and dirtbag in some sort of nasty hotel or motel in California. Pull it up. Paragraph 21. Quote from the FBI agent. I know that law enforcement canvassed hotels and determined through video surveillance that Peischer and the victim were at this particular motel. Quote, I know that law enforcement subsequently entered the hotel and was able to find this girl. It found some incriminating material. He had brought some razor blades and had her cutting herself. I mean, this guy's like a piece of debris, man. But the agent who was writing this wasn't involved in rescuing the child. And look, not every agent has this opportunity. Statistically, when people go missing, they very seldom turn up alive once it gets to the FBI pulling in the big command post. The runaways are, it is an unfortunate side of the job. I did have the opportunity to engage in uh, finding and actually recovering a girl who had gone running away, and it was a creep who had picked her up, and I got her alive. I mean, it's one of the proudest moments that I had as an FBI agent was recovering this girl. It was unique circumstances. She was actually an incredibly smart girl who was in bad circumstances at home with their parents and wanted to run away from them. And they were pretty bad to her, but she kind of picked the wrong dude to go and do it with. So, not for our purposes today, did actually recover that girl. One of the few really bright spots in that I can point back to, particularly over the last few years, and say, oh, maybe it was a good thing I went to the FBI. But to this complaint and to this agent, who is a terrorism agent, who's trying to say that this guy she got is a terrorist and not just some creeper pedophile who wanted to hook up with a 12-year-old girl, which he did. Back to the complaint. The minor victim spoke with medical and law enforcement professionals, and this affiant reviewed those recordings. So the actual real cops talked to the girl, the actual real medical professionals. They documented it, wrote some reports, have it on video. This agent, she was happy at her cubicle to just, I'll watch the interview. I don't want to get my hands really dirty. Come to find out that the girl was sexually abused by this guy, and that he wanted to jump off the top of the hotel roof, and they were going to commit suicide together. I mean, I don't know necessarily that this Peischer guy was playing with a full deck of cards between his ears, as well as this girl. But the affiant came to the conclusion that our bad guy had traveled from Pennsylvania to California in order to engage in illicit activity with this girl. And that is a violation of federal law. So she went forward and asked the judge for an arrest warrant. Is anything that I've spoken about here terrorism, though? What could be the outgrowth of this? I mean, that's really what I want to get to. It's very clear that Peischer is a pedophile. He's a piece of trash who needs to go feet first into a wood chipper. Great. I'm glad that law enforcement was able to apprehend him. I'm glad that law enforcement, not this agent who wrote it up, because she doesn't necessarily seem to really be like wanting to go in there and get her hands dirty. I'm glad that there is law enforcement in California that was willing to do that. They actually booted the door on the motel because there was an imminent threat to this girl. Good for them. They deserve some helmet stickers and some attaboys, maybe some bonuses. Certainly not the bosses who will get bonuses, though, because the bosses who will get bonuses, they're going to be the terrorism bosses, because the FBI has determined that this is terrorism now. What are the cautionary tales here? We covered it on this program all the time. It is the devolution of national security. We've gone from looking at legitimate threat actors out there who want to bring about political unrest through violent activities that will hurt people to, well, I mean, they're looking at some chat rooms out there. I mean, they're a low intelligence guy who doesn't have any resources. To this is a crazy guy who wants to do something violent like a mass shooting, but that's not a federal crime. We don't want to turn him in. We want to use him. We want to convince him instead that he can bring down the entire electrical grid for the United States by using some C4 that he doesn't have access to. Or to maybe we should fly in a crazy guy and have him travel around the interior, because nothing can ever go wrong when that happens. And, his plan is ridiculous, but we'll still charge him with terrorism. To a bunch of 16 and 17-year-olds are being jerks online, or maybe even being criminals online and trying to convince some 12-year-olds to take pictures of themselves and hurt themselves. Let's call them terrorists. This is the problem. It's not terrorism. And yet they're going to keep doing it until they get stopped. Okay, let's pivot to something completely different now. And I saw this story out of the Hollywood Reporter, and it's about the rise of the celebrity prison influencer. Yep, apparently that's a thing. I thought it was sort of a weird story to bring, but then I had a blast from the past that I wanted to bring about as we're dunking on the FBI for being completely inappropriate. So, from the piece itself first, there's a growing cohort of famous felons leveraging new media to rehab their images. And the first, they quote George Santos, former congressman, who I think his sentence was commuted. Quote, the reality is they have teams and people. They're trying to keep their voices alive. And that's sort of true. I mean, these people are not necessarily sitting in a prison cell doing a podcast like I'm doing right now, looking into the camera here in my home office where I've set up a nice little studio there. Thanks courtesy to Madam Friend. She helped me with the decorations there a couple months ago. We had to go for the new look, the tropical setting. The people in prison aren't doing that. They have teams because they have contacts on the outside. So you got the Sam Bankman-Fried, who's the fake crypto guy who's gone to prison. He's doing stuff. You have the Theranos girl. She's trying to do stuff. And then I saw this other one, Nicole Daedone, Daedone. And that name sounded familiar to me. So I did your homework for you, Rose Lopez, in the chat over on rumble.com/amradpod and also on YouTube at amradpod. She's in both. Episode 208, Tasteless. Because we talked about this woman, Nicole Daedone. I didn't get the update, though. She's in prison right now awaiting sentencing because she was convicted. She was a subject of a Netflix documentary, and she is actually trying to get stuff out on Instagram. She's using artificial intelligence to do that. But move on from that story, and I want to go back into the past about that girl or that woman, Nicole Daedone, because she got royally screwed by the FBI. So as a blast from the past, there's a story about her and her organization, which was weird, but I don't think it was illegal. I think there was definitely consent involved. The original story came from Revolver News, revolver.news. Headline, Netflix, the FBI, and a federal frame job that took down a wellness company. The brief notes on what this actual company did. It was called One Taste. It was an unconventional wellness startup built around orgasm-centered meditation. Okay, they all need Jesus. I get it. It's not my cup of tea, but it is technically legal. But due to the Me Too hysteria, some of the former members came forward and they said that they've been manipulated and sexually exploited, and they were financially drained. And then there was a Netflix documentary about this organization. So the FBI said, all right, we got Netflix, we got Me Too, we got an opportunity, let's go after it. So that's what they did. Enter the FBI, which brought charges. They brought like human trafficking charges against this group. The government had a star witness. Her name was Aries. And the problem, though, was this star witness said, hey, look, I was manipulated, I was trafficked, and I kept these long journals documenting how wrong these women did me at this wellness company. But as it came to pass, the journals she wrote were not from her time dealing with the wellness company. It came years later. And not only did it come years later, it came years later with editing from the FBI. The FBI agent who was involved with this case was helping to write journals, backdate them, and say, look, here's evidence that this woman was being abused. So these journals got submitted, and then they were completely exposed as being lies. And still, the Department of Justice and the FBI successfully prosecuted this Nicole Daedone and also another woman who was associated with this wellness company called One Taste. Here actually is the press release from the Eastern District of New York, one of the softest districts, we'll say, for the Department of Justice, where they go forward very aggressively there. Headline, founder of sexual wellness company One Taste and former head of sales convicted of forced labor conspiracy. They've been convicted and they are awaiting sentencing. Now, I mentioned an FBI agent who was involved. This FBI agent, his name, Special Agent Elliot McGinnis. We already talked about Krzyzewski. Let's talk about Elliot McGinnis, because this is the face of evil. Headline from frankreport.com. FBI's McGinnis, from NYPD brutality to rogue agent. Before joining the FBI, records show that Elliot McGinnis was a police officer for the New York Police Department. There was a civilian complaint of brutality against him, and he wound up resigning in 2009 and then found gainful employment over at the FBI. The alleged victim in that brutality case said that McGinnis punched him in the face and the groin. But there's been some other things that have come out. And on top of helping this witness for the One Taste case generate fake and fraudulent evidence, here's some other things that have come forward about Elliot McGinnis, a member of the FBI. And I'm trying to vet it, guys. I think he's still employed there, but I haven't 100% nailed it down yet. I'm doing my best. I still have my resources. I still have my assets in there, my little whistleblowers that bring me stuff. I'm working on it. Some other stuff, though, came out about Elliot McGinnis, special agent tied to a successful prosecution of 2 people for this wellness company. And again, the piece that I found about him comes from frankreport.com, headline, FBI McGinnis from NYPD brutality to rogue agent. Here's just a couple of them, and I didn't include all of them in the interest of brevity on today's show. The United States Attorney's Office withdrew a seizure warrant that he drafted because he wanted to do a civil asset forfeiture for a trust fund that belonged to an old elderly woman. This was when he was working on a civil rights squad, because God has a sense of humor. The United States Attorney's Office withdrew the seizure warrant when the defense revealed that Elliot McGinnis had knowingly presented false information, so he lied. In 2018, he allegedly told an attorney to breach a contract and kept it secret. In 2021, he accepted stolen documents and hid them. In 2018, he swapped a digital device that later had overlooked evidence of crime. So he had exculpatory evidence and hid it. In 2021, he threatened a victim with arrest if she did not cooperate with his designation of her as a victim. In 2022, he instructed a witness to destroy evidence. In 2023, he allegedly used excessive force on a 115-pound woman who had her hands above her head. He allegedly pointed his gun at her, swore at her, and said, quote, "Stand the F down." Then he put her handcuffs on her and bruised her. And the last one, 2024, he allegedly told a witness to hide evidence with him to obstruct a lawful subpoena. So a subpoena wound up getting issued to this particular witness. He said, "Hey, just give me the evidence so the subpoena won't apply to you." You can say, "Oh, I don't have anything." That's this dirtbag who, from what I can tell, still works for the FBI. All right, I want to go to one more here. And that is a blast from the uber past, because over the weekend, we had the FBI director out there who was partying with a bunch of dudes in a locker room. Let me say it this way. The FBI director spent several $100,000 to fly to Europe for a business trip. So he had a bunch of BS meetings so that he could justify going to watch the Olympic hockey team play their game. And then he used his position of power to go into a locker room with a bunch of naked dudes and party. Okay. And it's gotten a lot of people saying, what's up with this dude? He's had a bunch of these problems going on here with the traveling of the jet being abused and using some protective details for his girlfriend and some other things about some extravagances that he might have had. And you got me thinking about an old story. The first FBI director to ever be fired and the corruption that was attached to it. And I'd heard the stories about William Sessions before, but I really hadn't read much into it. So I did, and I wanted to bring it up, and maybe we can do a comparison to Kash Patel and one William Sessions. So I went to the Washington Post, because democracy dies in darkness, and a story that came from 1993, over 32 years ago, about the firing of Bill Sessions when he was at the helm. And let's compare and see, really what was it, the nature of his offenses versus what we see today. And he did get canned in the very early days of the Bill Clinton administration. So he was the first director who was fired in the 70-year history. The delay was because the Clinton administration wanted to avoid being accused of making the FBI a politicized agency. Remember Christopher Wray's departure? And now the FBI directorship is basically going to be a politically appointed position now. The next president's going to come in. It's supposed to be a 10-year appointment to ensure that that position isn't political, but that's a thing of the past. So kind of a parallel to what we saw with Kash Patel's appointment. Back to the piece. Headline reads, Clinton fires Sessions as FBI director. Sessions had been popular for his efforts to modernize the FBI, improve cooperation with local law enforcement agencies, cops being cops, and curb abuses, curb weaponization that was under J. Edgar Hoover. He also wanted to bring about more minorities and women into the Bureau. And as far as I know, the FBI is still committed to the 30 by 30 initiative. History has a way of rhyming, doesn't it, guys? So Sessions' firing stemmed from this Office of Professional Responsibility report that came out, where over 100 FBI employees were interviewed about his excesses. Here are some of those excesses. He bumped security agents off of his plane to make room for his wife to fly on the FBI jet. In fact, the FBI jet was diverted to pick his wife up and take her on some shopping excursions. And also, she was taken to get her nails done. There was a sham arrangement where he had asked an FBI attorney to help him avoid paying taxes on his limousine, his security vehicle driving him around, because that is a benefit to you that isn't provided. It's provided free, but it's considered to be a personal enrichment. So you owe the taxes on the limousine, on the armored vehicle. So the director of the FBI arranged for himself to be issued a firearm. Now, Sessions kept an unloaded firearm in the vehicle and said that therefore it made it for work when he was driving around on personal matters. But yeah, guy had himself issued a firearm. Who else has had that happen? In fact, not only has Kash Patel had that happen, the former co-deputy director of the FBI, Dan Bongino, had that arranged as well. The FBI director, Bill Sessions, also arranged for a $10,000 fence around his home. From what I understand, there's been some security protocols put into place for Kash Patel as well. And he got himself a sweet mortgage. I think they said it was $375,000 of a very, very beneficial mortgage rate that William Sessions arranged for himself. And all that led to Janet Reno, the Attorney General, talking with Bill Clinton. They decided to cut bait and fire William Sessions. The more things change, the more they stay the same, don't they? Who is worse, a $375,000 mortgage that he paid, or a $400,000 bill to the American people to fly to go watch the U.S. Olympic hockey team? All right, guys, that's going to do it for us on the stories and rundown. But before we get to the palate cleanse, just as a reflection, the title of today's show is Trans-Terrorism. I think that there's a legitimate reason to maybe look at some of the mentally disturbed people out there. I mean, there's not that many people, despite what NPR wants to report, who claim that they're Harry and they want to be a Sally, but there has been a connection to some recent violence. You would think that maybe a national security agency that wants to protect the American people against fraud and force might take that up under advisement and to do some sort of threat assessment. I don't know if that exists at present right now. But on the title of Trans-Terrorism, we're trying to jam that square peg into the round hole with the whole nihilistic violent extremists who are pedophiles and groomers and online trolls. When meanwhile, the definition of a nihilistic violent extremist group, a group that preys on vulnerable people and encourages them to engage in their worst ideas and record it for us. I think that FBI fits the bill quite nicely on that, don't you? And then the parallels to a prior FBI director who was fired, dismissed for corruption, abuse of power, abuse of position, and the current guy doing that in spades, doing that by orders of magnitude worse than that. What sort of corrective action has been taken against the guys like the McGinnises of the world, who have a long list of offenses while in the employ of the FBI and still taking down a paycheck? I think if you want to make the case that there needs to be a transition, then we should transition away from the FBI. It's outlived its usefulness, if it ever, in fact, did have a usefulness. We have a robust law enforcement apparatus in this country, completely capable. Shoot, local guys went and found a little girl who was in a motel in California and saved her from a vile piece of trash who deserved to be thrown feet first into a wood chipper. We do not need the affiants on the criminal complaint who, watched the recorded interviews that those guys did. Okay, so that's going to do it for us today. But like I said, we do have a nice palate cleanse, completely unrelated to everything that we talked about today. But I'm a dad. I like that my kids like me. They're my best cheerleaders. When I was with the FBI, man, there was nothing quite like getting home and having them meet you at the door and saying, how many bad guys did you take into custody today? Or they said, take to jail. But at their core, they're all mama's boys. And they all started out this way. So today's palate cleanse.
Let's go.
Go get Dad. Go get him. Go get him.
Isaiah.
You're so funny. You're so funny.
Isaiah, can we?
They're all mama's boys. All right, guys, that's it for today on the American Radicals podcast. If you haven't already, do all those things. We appreciate it. The likes, the follows, the shares, the subscribes. Leave a comment. We'll plan to be back with you tomorrow, noontime, on rumble.com/amradpod and on YouTube at amradpod. And until then, have a great day.
You've been listening to the American Radicals podcast. Find us on YouTube, Rumble, and X at AmRadPod.